Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Spider-Verse Retrospectives. Once more we continue our trek into tie-in country as today we will be starting our discussion on the next Spider-Verse tie-ins, the Spider-Verse Team-Up miniseries. Now, much like the Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries, the Spider-Verse Team-Up miniseries was an anthology book, and much like with Spider-Verse, it focused on various Spideys who are taking part in the event. However, while Spider-Verse was just kind of an anthology showcasing these Spideys and their elements, and in some cases showing how they got pulled into Spider-Verse, Spider-Verse Team Up actually involves groups of Spideys, as you can tell by the name of the miniseries. It involves these Spideys just coming together, teaming up, and facing off against common foes. Sometimes it's the Inheritors and their ilk. Sometimes it's just against something that they're encountering in their journeys, like maybe a supervillain or some threat that they're going up against. Bottom line, it's just the whole point of the Spider-Verse Team Up miniseries is to just showcase the various Spideys all working off of each other as you do with crossovers, which I'm all for. Like I mentioned when I talked about the Spider-Verse storyline, one of the strengths with a crossover like Spider-Verse is seeing all these different Spideys in the same room and seeing them work off of each other. And while we did get a bit of that in the Spider-Verse storyline, we didn't get a lot. There was still some untapped potential, especially with all the various Spideys, especially since a lot of the focus was still on the main universe Spider-Man and the Spideys he interacted with. So, this gives us an opportunity to see the other Spideys working off of each other, because while I love Spider-Man, the thing with Spider-Verse is, again, it features all the Spider-Men, and a lot of the Spider-Men are very different, as showcased with the Superior Spider Army. Some of the Spideys in that group were a lot darker than others, and some were just as lighthearted as the main universe one. So, what happens when you put all these different but similar characters in the same room? What happens? Well, that's what this miniseries is here to show us, and as such, we start things off with, well, issue 1 of Spider-Verse Team Up. And again, like with the Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries, it does feature multiple stories an issue, but whereas Spider-Verse featured like a handful of stories altogether, the Spider-Verse Team Up issues only have two stories per issue. So yeah, that's all we're going to be looking at. Like with the Spider-Verse tie-in miniseries, though, I am going to be looking at the plots for all of them before I give my thoughts on the issue. So, fair warning. So, anyway, sorry, digesting breakfast. Our first story is called The Power of Positive Thinking, and this story actually showcases how Ben Reilly was recruited into the Army. If you remember my discussions about the Spider-Verse storyline, one of the Spideys that we saw there was a version of Ben Reilly from a universe where he stayed on as Spider-Man. However, we didn't really get a lot of him as a character. Really, the most we got of him was just that he was Ben Reilly, except he was Spider-Man. Well, this is our time to finally see him in his element, and it actually starts with him in his universe fighting what appears to be the Vulture. Now, at first, he treats this like a regular outing against the Vulture, even talking about how, come on, you should have packed this in ages ago. Even Sean Connery knew when to quit, and you, sir, are no Connery. But then he notices the Vulture looks a bit more feral, as his teeth are now sharpened, and his eyes are a bit more black, which even Ben is a little surprised by. However, he soon learns that this is not he's not alone, as after Vulture talks about how the Vulture doesn't say this, but after he hears someone talk about how he wanted sharpened teeth because the Masters feed on the essence, but we get the rest, he turns around and soon finds that there's a whole gaggle of Vultures all there fighting him. Which, yeah, another thing which I do kind of like, and yeah, they're all just different Vultures from different points in the timeline, from different points in the Marvel Universe, and even one of them's Vulture Noir, so that's a plus. But yeah, these aren't the Vultures of Ben's universe. These are Verna's pets, pretty much they're all as feral as most other ones, though these ones still clearly are able to still coherently speak because they actually do talk with Spidey and are clearly still getting a kick out of kicking his ass. However, Ben is, of course, as such, while Ben seems to almost get his butt handed to him as he ends up getting pulled to the ground, specifically on top of a building, and almost gets dogpiled by the Vultures, well, he gets some unexpected help as the Spider Army is here to recruit him. In this case, the representatives of said army are Old Man Spider, aka Ezekiel Sims, which we learn later in Spider-Verse, and Spider-Ham, who immediately start punching out Vultures. As such, Ben, of course, asks the same questions that most other Spideys would ask, namely, what the hell's going on? Why is that guy a cartoon pig? And yeah, they give him the same lowdown. The Spiders of the multiverse are being hunted, they need his help, and they can't stay here, and so forth. Of course, Ben is asking more about all the Vultures, and they further explain that these are not the Vultures he's familiar with, and that they're Verna's pets. However, However, the vultures don't really take kindly to these two other Spideys coming in and ruining their meal, so they do end up. So one of them ends up running into Spider-Ham and tries knocking him off a building. But again, he's an alternate Spider-Man. He just ends up sticking to the side, which results in Old Man Spider shooting a web at him, pulling him to the ground, and breaking his arm. Which becomes a big no-no for Ben. He says, "Hey, what are you doing? You broke his arm. You can't do that." But in the middle of his chewing out, he sees the other vultures turn on that one, as they all immediately grab him as he's on the ground, or on the floor, on the building, or on the roof, whatever. Bottom line, when he's keeled over, the vultures end up going for his arm and start trying to eat it, which, yeah, to showcase just how feral these things are, they will go for anything, because apparently Verna doesn't feed her pets very much, so yeah, I can kind of see why they would go feral there. The point is, Ben is ultimately shocked by this, and he is able to put together that these are alternate Spider-Men from parallel universes. He even stating that at first he thought they were clones, but clearly they're from other worlds and so forth. But even he's still not entirely down with what they're doing, because again, he just broke a guy's arm, and even Ben is like, "Oh wait, so the cartoon pig is okay with this?" And he's like, "Yeah." Is okay with this. It's like, "Yeah, he got this more than you do." And even Spider-Ham's like, "Hey, in my world, an anvil to the head is just a flesh wound. You guys are also squishy in this world. You guys are also much more squishy in your world." But as the three Spideys are arguing, they all suddenly get hit by some of Vulture Noir's knives. It doesn't end up killing them, ultimately just kind of giving little punctures, but, well, no, it was all the punctures needed. Hold on a sec. Sorry, I saw something on my screen. But anyway, yeah, it turns out that each of the knives are coated with a paralyzing agent, which causes all three Spideys to just be frozen in place. Which, yeah, it doesn't last very long and doesn't do any long-lasting harm, but we'll leave the Spideys in place long enough for the Vultures to get in close and take a few nibbles, so to speak, as they prepare them for Verna's arrival. As such, Ham and Old Man Spider start chewing Ben out, saying, "You fool, you've killed us, we can't move." But Ben he refuses to give up, as he struggles against the poison, and actually manages to move muscle, specifically his fingers, which allows him to shoot a web right at one of the vultures' face. And one of those vultures actually has acid spit, and the instant that the web hits his face, he recoils, and some of the acid ends up flying into Vulture Noir's face. Acid spitting Vulture's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that," but Vulture Noir is pissed off at him, and in retaliation, he takes one of his knives and stabs him right in the gut. Which, again, doesn't kill him, but this does distract the vultures long enough for the paralyzing agent to wear off, and as a result, the three Spideys immediately just web them up and leave them all trapped in cocoons. As such, while Ben thinks that maybe they should bring them to the cops, Old Man Spider tells them that it's not really a bother. Eventually Verna will be along, and she'll probably punish them harder than any police could. As such, Ben, of course, Ben gives the argument of, "Well, if Verna lady is as bad as you say she is, then I can't just leave my city unprotected." But again, they reassure him that the inheritors are only after the Spideys of the multiverse, and if he's not here, then Verna won't stay. And on top of that, this world's Peter Parker is powerless, so even if she does, so ultimately there is nothing here for her to stick around for. As such, Old Man Spider and Spider-Ham do manage to convince Ben to go with them, and so he goes through the portal and joins them on the safe zone, where he immediately starts going to meet everybody. However, as he goes off to talk to Spider-Gwen, basically Spider-Ham starts talking about how they think he seems a lot more jaded than others. Basically, he's too innocent. He thinks that, he thinks he's just too innocent, and that if they really want to get a good Ben Reilly, maybe they should get one that's had a harder life. And Old Man Spider actually argues against that, as he says, "Yeah, an hour ago I would have agreed with you, but he broke through a paralyzing agent when you and I could have, just because of his positive attitude. To him, failure is not a possibility, and that may allow him to do things that others cannot." So he does end up thinking that Ben might be a good idea, because his optimism does essentially give him a higher sense of bravery than others. And yeah, it may be a little more naive and stupid, but again, he just showcased what that optimism could do for him, because he couldn't accept defeat, he was able to power through and do enough to earn them a victory. Even Old Man Spider says, besides, if his life is anything like the Ben Reillys of other lives, then dying here might be the best thing for him, because at least here he'll die among friends, with The issue ending as we see Cosmic Spider-Man still overlooking the group. So, again, keep in mind this was during the lead-in, so they're still recruiting Spidey. So there you go. But anyway, the second story is called The Luck of the Parkers, and while the first story focused on the Spider Army as it was building up its ranks, the second story actually focuses on the Superior Spider Army as they're attempting to build up their ranks. And what's going on is that their liaisons are the Six-Armed Spider-Man and Spider-Man Noir, who have been sent to another version of New York to recruit that world's Peter Parker into their army. There's only one problem. In this reality, Peter Parker had an allergic reaction to the spider bite, and as a result, he's been hospitalized. Which is kind of a bad thing, but it did essentially act as kind of a double-edged sword, because in this reality, because Peter was hospitalized so much, this world's Aunt May and Uncle Ben pretty much stayed by his side the whole time, practically living in the hospital, which as a result, when their house got burgled, because they weren't there, Uncle Ben wasn't shot and killed. So Peter technically saved his uncle's life because of his sickness. So I guess good for him. Well, either way, Six-Armed Spidey and Spider-Man Noir immediately think, well, I guess there's really nothing left for us here, so maybe we should go. But Six-Armed Spider-Man kind of argues against that because, well, while this Peter may not have gotten out as well as other Spideys with his spider bite, he's still got something from them because he's still considered a spider totem, as a side effect of the spider bite is that his arm has changed. It's covered in more hair, and his fingers have seemed to fuse together, and he's got claws on his hands. So clearly something still happened to him, but it's just, again, the allergic reaction didn't hit him as well as others, and essentially in his state, he's a sitting duck, so if the inheritors came around to try and kill him, well, he wouldn't stand a chance. And considering all the amounts of collateral damage surrounding him, because he's in the middle of the hospital, yeah, Six-Armed Spidey thinks that maybe they can do something to help him. While Spider-Man Noir argues for potentially putting him down, Six-Armed Spidey, well, because he's most like the main universe Spider-Man, he just shoots that down as well before he has an idea. As such, he tells the Six-Armed Spidey asks his Noir counterpart to keep an eye on their hospitalized doppelganger as he ends up crawling away into the hospital that they're in. As he ends up crawling away into the hospital he's in. As such, Six-Armed Spidey ends up crawling through the vents into a lab and manages to find the files on his comatose counterpart's blood work. However, as he's doing that, Spider-Man Noir, well, his spider sense immediately goes off, and we soon see the cause, as the comatose Peter, he starts convulsing in his bed, and while at first Aunt May and Uncle Ben think that this is him finally waking up, well, it seems actually to be a turn for the worst, as his arm, well, actually not his arm, his whole body begins changing as more hair starts growing around him. He seems to be getting bigger, and we soon see that he's now transformed into a bipedal anthropomorphic spider creature with barely any form of consciousness. As such, Spider-Man Noir decides that he has to go in and save the day as he breaks through the window and webs up his now monstrous counterpart and pulls him outside, carrying him to the roof. Which, again, Uncle Ben and Aunt May are watching this, so imagine how they're feeling seeing their nephew turn into a monster and now get pulled out by this guy in black. So yeah, I'd be a little freaked out. But either way, Noir ends up calling the Six-Armed Spidey via an intercom in his ear and tells him what happened. And we see that Six-Armed Spidey has been a little busy as we see him mixing up something in the hospital's lab. As such, when Spider-Man Noir tells him he took him out of the hospital, the Six-Armed Spidey asks, well, where are you bringing him? It's like, for now, the roof. And so Spider-Man Noir throws the monster Peter onto the roof, and yeah, they immediately get themselves into a little fight, and it's clear Spider-Man Noir doesn't stand a chance, as whatever the mutation has been doing to this world's Peter, it's definitely made him a lot stronger than him, so even he realizes he might not stand a chance. However, thankfully, Six-Armed Spidey manages to come in just in time, and so he manages to use his athleticism and multiple arms to try and confuse the monstrous Peter before he jabs something right into his neck. Ultimately, he still gets thrown off of the monster Peter and into his Noir counterpart, who tries to catch him, but it's kind of hard to catch a guy who has 6 arms. But in the midst of it all, as Spider-Man Noir prepares to pull out a pistol and shoot him, essentially going for what he considers a mercy killing, well, we see that the monster Peter is changing as the spider bits begin falling off, and he actually looks human again. Now, in his stupor, he almost falls out of the hospital with Six-Armed Spidey saving him, but yeah, he's cured. it turns out the serum that the six-armed Spidey had been concocting was one that he had come up with. Kind of going into a bit more history with Spider-Man mythos, at one point in the comic storyline, Peter had tried to create a serum to rid him of his spider powers, but it's what resulted in him getting the six arms. In the main universe, he eventually found a cure for this by when he first encountered Morbius and realized his blood could act as a catalyst to undo the transformation. Except in Six-Armed Spider-Man's universe, Morbius was killed before they ever got a chance to meet, so he never got the cure. As such, essentially, in Six-Armed Spider-Man's words, he decided to create the serum again, as he figured that because the spider DNA hadn't completely altered comatose Peter's cells yet, the odds were more in his favor. But even he realized that it might not work. So even he admits they just got lucky. But it did work, and basically hospitalized Peter is now spider-free. There's no trace of the spider totem energy in him, and he has no superpowers. And as such, he ends up passing out. Hospitalized Peter ends up passing out in his counterpart's arms, and they end up making him a web cod. And basically, as both Spidey's spider senses warn them that people are coming to the roof, they mainly hide away, and as they see a security guard coming up with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And sure enough, they end up finding Peter unconscious on the web cod, and thankfully a doctor that was with him tells him that he's fine, his pulse is normal, and they think he's going to be okay. As such, our six-armed Spidey and Spider-Man Noir decide that they really have no reason to stay here. The Inheritors aren't going to come for this Peter. He's got no spider power, so all things are good. And so they open him a portal and leave while hospitalized Peter is being hugged by his Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And with Spider-Man Noir monologuing to himself, thinking that, yeah, their superior might not like how things turn out, but Noir will consider this a win, because at least in one universe, the Parkers got a happy ending. So that's nice. I like that. Okay, so my thoughts on the story. First, the power of positive thinking. This one is definitely a lot of fun, and I do like how it establishes this version of Ben Reilly. Like, from the outset, this feels much like a more familiar take on Spider-Man, because part of the appeal when Ben Reilly came back during the original Clone Saga was that, well, like I said, Peter had gotten a bit darker due to then recent events that had happened in the comics. He had been going around calling himself the Spider. He had abandoned his identity as Peter Parker, and basically he was just not doing well. And as a result of that, he just wasn't doing so good. Not helped by the fact that during that storyline, his Aunt May had gotten another heart attack and was hospitalized. Again, food digesting, sorry. As a result, that's what prompted Ben Reilly to come back, and while he definitely went on his way more, while he was definitely had a bit of a hard life himself, he was definitely still more of an optimistic Peter Parker, as Ben still had that high spirit to him, and he still wanted to do good and help others, and yeah, he lamented that he was living a false life because he was a clone, but ultimately when he put the mask on and took on the mantle of the Scarlet Spider, it was like slipping right back into everything. He was just as excitable, just as quippy, just as fun as other Spideys. And a distinct difference between this Ben Reilly and the one from the main universe, this Ben Reilly's life was nothing but great after he became Spider-Man, because as we learn later, just everything turned out great for him. Every encounter, every enemy, every force that he fought against, he was able to win. And he even says that in the story, because while Old Man Spider and Spider-Ham say this is a war and they're monsters, we have to be a little tougher on them, he responds with, every encounter I've had, I have won. I've faced impossible odds and come out on top I know how everything goes. I can do this without resorting to that. Again, it showcases that he is a bit more peppy, and basically a big difference between him and the main universe Ben Reilly, this one refuses to say no. Now again, you could say a similar thing with the main universe Ben Reilly, but this one clearly took it more to heart, because this guy, he does not give up. And we see that exemplified in the story, because he's more peppy and optimistic, which in a way is probably good for Spider-Man, but what makes it work for him is that it makes him more fun to read about, more fun to see, especially when contrast him with Old Man Spider, who is a bit more gruffer, and Spider-Ham, who, despite his cartoony appearance, is A-okay with the brutalizing of criminals. So, I do like how that works, but what makes it even funner, makes it even more fun is essentially it pays off. While Old Man Spider and Spider-Ham are looking down on Ben because they think he hasn't seen enough action and doesn't really understand the whole dark side of the world, again, he immediately showcases what positive thinking can really do for you when he manages to break through the paralysis. For him, he refuses to give up, no matter the odds, no matter the circumstances. He's ready to fight, kick ass, and save the day, even if it means having to sacrifice himself. And we see that with him in this, and when we see that with him in that just little brief moment. Even when he's being told by these other two Spideys, "You killed us, we're doomed. We can't beat this." He just looks danger in the face and says no, and just resist as hard as he can. And yeah, he can only do something small, but that small little thing ultimately gives the Spideys the advantage they need to secure a victory. Because again, in his eyes, he cannot lose. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, he's arrogant that everything will work out. No, it's that he refuses to give up. No matter the odds, no matter the circumstances, he is ready to keep on fighting. As Old Man Spider said at the end of that story, he'll rush straight into the lion's den, and we'll be sure everything will work out. Now, I'm sure that's not the exact words, but the analogy's the same. But that's what the analogy was. And yeah, I could see that with him. He's the type of Spidey who, because he is so confident that he can win the day and come out on top, he will do things that other Spideys won't. He'll be one of the first to volunteer, be one of the first to keep fighting, and he will not stop until the bad guys have been beaten. And it's nice, and seeing him work off of Old Man Spider and Spider-Ham, who basically who act a bit more, I want to say curmudgeonly, which I don't know if it applies to Spider-Ham, but maybe Old Man Spider, I don't know. But basically, these two guys that are a bit more rougher and tougher than other Spideys, seeing seeing him work off them, and in some cases even change their minds, like with Old Man Spider. It's nice. I like it. I like seeing how they work. I like seeing them work off each other like that. It's fun, and ultimately it is. And I like seeing stuff like that. I love the whole idea of positive heroes that, yeah, they may not have seen the darker sides of life, but it's their knowledge that there is a darker side of life that keeps them optimistic, that they essentially try to be the positive force in the world that makes things better, that, yeah, things can be dark, but there's always some light around the corner, and they're ready to be that light if necessary. Yes, it can make them naive in some regards, and in some way, and ultimately make them oblivious to other things, but again, I think it's a good thing to have that light, because if you don't have it, then when things get dark, you might just settle in and not fight. So but that's why these people are here. They can remind you there's a light. It can give you hope, and that hope can inspire you to keep going. Which I like that, and I like seeing that here with Ben Reilly. He's more he's fun, he's energetic. It's nice to see him get pulled into the fray, and ultimately, even by the end, Old Man Spider's convinced, yeah, he might be a bit naive, but maybe we need someone like him for this mission. So, good on you. Fun little team up. As for the luck of the Parkers, this one is a lot more heartfelt. Whereas the power positive thinking was more fun action and superhero stuff. This one definitely feels like it's on the brink of tragedy. As we see Spider-Man Noir and the Six-Armed Spidey encounter a version of Peter, well, whose life after getting bitten by the spider things just went wrong. He's in a coma. His aunt he can barely move, and while he may not have gotten the spider powers in the same way other Spideys did, well, he's still a target for the inheritors, and so essentially they realize that. And so while there is no reason for them to stay, because he wouldn't be a viable asset for their army, which I'm sure even Superior Spider-Man would just throw him to the wolves. These two PDs are ready to go in. Well, Six-Armed Spider-Man more than anything. Spider-Man Noir is definitely a more rough and gruff realist, which I'll get to when I talk about the contrast between him and his counterparts' characters, but at the very least, they do realize that they still need to help him, and it still does lead to some very cool action when they duke it out with their counterpart when he starts mutating into the spider monster. As it definitely kind of has a slight horror vibe to it, especially as he goes on the attack and they have to rush to try and help him. It's interesting, but at the same time, I do like the ending. Again, I do like seeing endings where things work out, and I do like that in the end of the day, everything does work out for the Parker family of this universe. Yes, ultimately, there was still a tragedy that did this, but Because of that tragedy, Uncle Ben survived his encounter. Survived the was well. Okay, he didn't survive it. He just never encountered the robber because he was at the hospital with Peter. And while Peter may have lost his spider powers, at the end of the day, he's cured of them. He's woken up. He's not a monster anymore, and he has his family there with him. It's sweet. I like that, and it's a nice little thing. And again, it showcases again part of the whole reason for why Spider-Man does what he does, because he wants to help others and do the right thing. And basically, from the eyes of both Spider-Man Noir and the Six-Armed Spidey, this is a world where things have finally turned out, and it's all thanks to them. I like it. It's sweet. It's sweet, kind of optimistic, and definitely heartfelt, especially with the final panel of the comic showcasing Uncle Ben and Aunt May holding their Peter in their arms. So it's sweet. I like that. As well, on top of that, another little thing that I love about this story is the contrast between these two different Spideys. Like I mentioned before, part of the appeal with Spider-Verse is having all these different and unique Spideys all interacting with one another. And the Six-Armed Spider-Man and Spider-Man Noir are two very different Spideys. Six-Armed Spider-Man is a lot like his main universe counterpart, so he definitely is a believer in the whole thou shalt not kill, we need to do the right thing, we need to try and find other options first. While Spider-Man Noir, well, he's not a killer, and he won't resort to killing if he can. It's still an option for him. He carries a pistol on his person for a reason, and while he is a Spidey that wants to fight for hope and do the right thing, well, his world isn't exactly nice, as I hopefully have demonstrated when I talked about Edge of Spider-Verse #1. His world is still darker. There's a reason why he's called Spider-Man Noir, because his world does kind of have does have a shroud of darkness surrounding it. Now, while Peter ultimately does still try to do the right thing because he's still Spider-Man and he wants to help others. At the end of the day, he is a Spidey that's a bit more rough and gruff, especially compared to other Spideys. So seeing these two contrasting personalities working off each other, I think is nice. As Six-Armed Spidey is a bit more extroverted and definitely is appalled when he hears his 1930s counterpart advocate for mercy killing this world's Peter. And likewise, Spider-Man Noir, well, he is a little surprised to see his counterpart's reactions. He's also a bit more understanding too, because, well, this Spidey is not like him. This guy is a lot more excitable, more happy. And another little thing I like about this, seeing Spider-Man Noir react. The whole story is told with the narrator is his inner monologue, which fits up with the Spider-Man Noir comics. But one of the things that I like, especially in this regard, is his reaction to the worlds they're visiting. Keep in mind, Spider-Man Noir's world is set in the 1930s, and so he is jumping through worlds that are set in the future, not just for us, but for him. His world is so behind ours, and technology isn't as advanced as it is in our day, and so he marvels at all these new things. And even at one point he talks about how the world of Tomorrow Fair that he saw in his world really does not compare to all the stuff he's seen ever since he's traveled into these future worlds. And he even talks about how these future worlds seem to affect people, as when he looks through the window of the hospital and sees this world's Aunt May and Uncle Ben standing over their Peter's bed, he remarks how young they look, which is a little surprising, but he talks about how in his world it's like everyone's trying to look older, which makes sense. Again, his world is set during the Great Depression. People didn't really have a lot of things to smile about at that time, and essentially had to step up and try and do whatever they could to stay afloat, because if they didn't, then things could ultimately turn out badly. So so to see these versions that feel like they can have a little bit more weight taken off and try to be young and try to enjoy life more, be younger, it's nice. I do like that. It's again I like seeing them noting the differences between their worlds and marveling at them. I especially like it because, like with many other Peter Parkers in the multiverse, as I said, Spider-Man Noir's Uncle Ben is dead, and so I imagine how you would feel seeing alternate versions of your parental figures standing over your unconscious body. Just imagine, I feel like that would still hurt a little. So I like that. I like that. So, and again, like I said, I like the ending. And I do like how even in the end, throughout all, Spider-Man Noir even says, I consider this a win. Which again goes back to how he may be more rough and gruff than other Spideys, But he is still Spider-Man. He wants the good guys to win in the end. He wants light to prevail. Yeah, he steps a little bit more into the dark than other Spideys, but ultimately he's on the side of light. And when it comes down to it, while he was still willing to put his hospitalized counterpart out of his misery if he thought necessary, his six-armed Spidey essentially showcased that that wasn't necessary, and he's just happy things worked out in this world. So I like that. I think it's sweet. I think it's a good finale. It has some good action. Seeing when the Spideys go in when they get ready to fight their counterpart, it's got to lead to some nice little character stuff as we see Noir and Six-Armed Spidey just working off and clashing with one another. And overall, I think it's just a sweet story. Nice to the point, and nice succinct to the point, and just filled with warm fuzzies by the end. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope to see you on Tuesday as we look at issue 2 of Spider-Verse Team Up. Till then, hope you have a good day, and I'll see you then. Take care.